respected elders, brothers, sisters, youngsters, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Once again, alhamdulillah, we thank Allah for having given us this opportunity on this blessed night of Thursday to come together and do one of the best acts of ibadah, that is seeking knowledge. And this is one venue where we thank the organizers for having given us this opportunity to be able to discuss current affairs, things that are going on around the world. The topic for tonight is Bretton Woods and Kazan. Most of you must have done some research on Google as to what is Bretton Woods and what is Kazan. Kazan was heard recently in the news. It was very much in the headlines. I'm not an economist, but I thought of doing some reading and I did some research, and this is what I wanted to share with you all. I know we have some students from UDSM. Anybody is an economist here? Anybody is doing economy? No economist student here? I thought there will be somebody, so they would have been able to enlighten us during the discussion period. But anyways, so Bretton Woods and Kazan. So Bretton Woods is the name of a place in the US. You can see it in the map here, New Hampshire. There was a hotel, Mount Washington Hotel. So in 1944, as the Second World War was coming to a close, it had not finished yet, but the Allies were already defeating the Nazis in Germany, and there was chaos in the world as far as the economy was concerned. There was total destruction because of the war. But here you had this gathering of people in this place in the US, Mount Washington Hotel. 720 delegates met up in this hotel from 44 different countries. And the purpose was to design a new economic system after Second World War, and to create an environment whereby countries would be able to trade with each other in the best way possible, smoothly. So basically to create networking, to create relationships again after the World War. So I think the intention looked good of this meeting. There were two main architects of this seminar or of this gathering. Harry Dexter White, the one on the left, who was an American, and John Maynard Keynes, who was a British. They were the main proponents of the Bretton Woods Treaty or the Bretton Woods system. And they were not on the same page. They had their differences, but they proposed it to this 720 delegates from 44 different countries. There were African countries also that were represented. And finally, the meeting went on for almost 3 weeks, 22 days, they said. And finally, they came up with a system to facilitate this trade between countries. So definitely we had countries which had a surplus. So we had the developed countries and the developing countries, the first world countries and the third world countries. So there were some countries which had a surplus, and most of the countries had a deficit. The global north and the global south. At that time we didn't have this classification. So they sat together to design an economic system as to how to regulate and how can these countries work together. So three main institutions were designed or were introduced in this seminar. One, of course, was the IMF, International Monetary Fund. So the primary function of this institution was to regulate the exchange rates. So as the countries will be trading with each other, they'll all be having their own currencies. So those exchange rates need to be regulated. What was happening was countries were devaluating their own currencies to be a better exporting entity so that they can export their goods and make more profits. So there was no control. So IMF was introduced that they will come in and regulate the exchange rates between the countries. Not only that, but countries that are in trouble, so countries that are in deficit, for example, IMF would come and advise them, okay, you're in deficit, this is what you need to do to improve your economy. So this was the primary function of IMF. And then you had the International Bank for Reconstruction and Development, IBRD, which has now become the World Bank. So in this seminar, they said one of the main things that drives wars, that causes wars, is poverty. People are poor, and this is one of the reasons people fight. So we need to have a bank that will give money to these poor countries so that they can become rich and eliminate poverty. So they can have projects in their countries to eliminate poverty. So this was the World Bank, International Bank for Reconstruction and Development. And the third was the World Trade Organization, the one that you see in the middle here. World Trade Organization was brought in to settle disputes. Naturally, when countries trade with each other, they will naturally have disputes. So there is regulation that is needed, and inevitably there will be conflicts. So whenever there are conflicts, the World Trade Organization would come and sort out these conflicts. So these were the three institutions that were created. But then there was something important that happened. By that time, the US was already an economic power, and they were holding 60 to 70% of the world gold reserves. So all the gold in the world at that time, 60 to 70% was held by the United States. And what they said was every currency around the world should be pegged to gold. But now all the gold was in the US. So what they did was they pegged the US dollar to gold. They set a fixed rate, $35 per ounce of gold. Then whoever wanted gold, so they pegged all the other currencies around the world to the US dollar, because they said we don't have enough gold for everybody. So whoever wants gold now, you peg your currency to the US dollar, and US dollar will be equivalent to the gold that we have, $35 per ounce. So this was the calculation that was created with the Bretton Woods agreement. So I think so this diagram explains, it's not very clear, but you have gold, it was pegged at $35 an ounce to the US dollar. And then all the other currencies, so British pound, Dutch marks, the French currency, and all the countries around the world had to peg themselves to the US dollar. And it was a good system, because now you could only have currency which was pegged to gold. So if you want to print your currency, you peg it to the US dollar, and the United States would reserve that amount of gold in their reserves. So for example, if Tanzania wanted to print their money, they would set up a gauge with US dollar, and that equivalent amount of gold would be set aside. This is Tanzania's gold in the US treasuries. This was the system, Bretton Woods. So very disciplined, none of the countries could devaluate their own currencies, and everything looked like it was running smoothly. But then what happened was in 1970s, I think the Vietnam War came in. And countries realized that the US, the United States, is spending more. So they're printing money, they're printing US dollars, and they're using up all this money, which is more than the gold reserves that they have. Because the need was such. There was a war that they had to fund. So they were printing US dollars, but it was not equivalent to the gold that they had in the reserves. Hope it's not too complicated. So the French were the first one to wake up. They said, aha, there's something fishy here. So instead of buying dollars, they told the United States, we want our gold. You don't give us US dollars now. We want the gold that is there in your reserve. So don't keep it in your reserves, you give it to us, we will save it. So transport it to us, and we will keep it in our reserves. The US could not say no. So that amount of gold was removed from the US reserves and sent to France. And all the other countries woke up. Germany said, we want gold. And all the other countries said, no, we also want gold. We don't want the US dollar now. We want the gold in your reserves. So the US realized that the gold in their reserves was going down. And they were worried. So 1971, President Nixon came in and said, we suspend the Bretton Woods agreement. We are no longer going to peg the US dollar to the gold reserves that we have. We are not going to follow this Bretton Woods agreement. So the US dollar became a fiat currency. Fiat currency is a currency that is not pegged to the US dollar. So it becomes a currency, so you have paper, they put a value, and the government decides that this amount will have this value, and it's not pegged to the gold that you have. So the government decides the value of the notes that we have. And the moment this happened, all the other currencies that were pegged to the US dollar also became fiat currencies. Now there was chaos. The US had withdrawn from this treaty. All the currencies have become fiat currencies. So they're all setting their own rates. Then the US did something very smart. What they did was they traveled down to Saudi Arabia and set up an agreement with Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia was the leading oil producer at that time. They went and set up an agreement of 50 years. For the next 50 years, let's have an agreement whereby Saudi Arabia will be selling their gold exclusively in US dollars. So whoever wants to buy oil will first have to buy US dollars, and then you can buy oil. So that created a demand for the US dollar. So after Bretton Woods, the US dollar briefly went down, but when they signed this agreement again, the US dollar again was in demand. A very smart thing that they did, and I don't know why Saudi Arabia agreed to this. They were told that your currency is going to be pegged to the US dollar, fixed currency. So your currency is not going to fluctuate. And they saw stability in this. And in return, they were given a chance to invest in the US Treasury bonds. We'll come to that later on. What are the Treasury bonds? The US Treasury bonds. So this was a smart move that was played. And again, the US dollar became the dominant currency in the world. So Bretton Woods, US dollar becoming the dominant currency, and then the fiat currencies, and then the petrodollar. I want you to understand this sequence. And then, briefly I want to discuss the US debt now. So starting from 1971, this is a different topic altogether. We can have a whole session just to discuss this. But I thought of just mentioning it, and you can start doing some research. And it's important to know this. So right from 1971, when the US detached itself, US government detached its currency, the US dollar, from gold, it became a free bird. So they just started printing money. And the demand was there, so they started distributing it around the world. And they started going down in debt. They did not have that much money, so they were taking debt from the US Treasury. And the debt has not recovered since then. To date, the national debt of the United States is $35 trillion. It has not recovered. So they have such a big debt, the national debt. Kukopa ni harusi, kulipa ni matanga. In Swahili they say. For as long as there's money, keep on taking loans and do whatever you want. So the wars that are going on just now, the way the US is funding it, the United States government is funding it, it's all loan money. It's not money that they have. Printed money just going around. And now, to facilitate this loan, so the US government is taking a loan from the Treasury, and then to fund this loan, they started floating Treasury bonds. And these were bought by all these countries. So today, you have China, Japan, if you see Hong Kong, Ireland, Luxembourg, United Kingdom, Saudi Arabia, Brazil, all of them have bought this treasury bonds. So basically, these loans have been transferred to these countries. These countries that are mentioned here are the ones that have funded this loan of the United States government. So $35 trillion in the form of treasury bonds, and these countries have bought these bonds. They're getting some payment, but they're also funding it. So they call this a Ponzi scheme. Ponzi scheme, you find 3 investors who come and invest in your business, and then you have to pay them profits. But you don't pay them profits. You keep the profit to yourself. What you do is, you look for 5 more investors who invest in your business. You take their money and you pay the first 3 investors. And then after a while, you look for 10 more investors who will pay the 5 investors. And then you look for 15 more who will pay the previous. And the profits are being sucked out. So you're just taking one person's money and you're paying the other, while your profits, your business is prospering. It's called a Ponzi scheme. This is all in the internet. You can follow it for those who are interested. This is world economy. It's very complex. But now these countries have bought the treasury bonds. Today, they are talking about de-dollarization. They are trying to look for an alternative, but at the same time, they want the United States to survive so that the treasury bonds still hold value. Otherwise, they will also go down with the United States. So it's very, very complex. But I do not want to go into detail of this. So now we've reached a stage whereby there is weaponization of the US dollar. When you have a war, you have weapons like tanks and bombs and jet fighters. But now there's a concept, weaponization of the US dollar. So because most of the trade around the world, countries that have to buy oil, you have the SWIFT system in the world, most of them need US dollars. So the currency that is in circulation around the world, the dominant currency is the United States dollar. And they have a system whereby they say everybody should put a reserve in the Federal Reserve in the US. Only then can you trade around the world. So what happens is, the moment a country goes against the United States, what they do is they freeze the assets. You must have heard about sanctions. Vikwazo. They put sanctions on you. So you can't trade. They take you out of the SWIFT system, and whatever reserves you have, they hold it back. So Iran went through it after the Iranian Revolution. All the Iranian assets that were parked in the US banks were frozen. Libya went through it. Afghanistan, so much poverty, but whatever assets they had in US banks was frozen. So now US is using it as a weapon. The latest example was Russia. In 2022, when Russia went into Ukraine, the first thing that the US did was they froze the Russian assets in the US banks. Russia's total reserves were around $612 billion. $612 billion total assets. Half of it were parked in Western countries. So the moment they went into Ukraine, these Western countries decided to freeze these assets. Half of it, 50%. $300 billion were frozen. US, Canada, Australia, UK, New Zealand, and I think Japan also, and France. They froze these Russian assets. So you can imagine, half of your assets are frozen. What do? You're almost crippled. But it looks like Russia was anticipating this. So they found a way out. They found a market for their oil. They started selling it at a lower price to India, and India started challenging that oil to Europe. So they've managed to bypass these sanctions. Similarly, Iran has also mastered this. Iran, after all the sanctions that were put on Iran, they mastered a way of going around the sanctions, of working around the SWIFT system. With all their assets frozen, they still managed to bypass and they prospered. And they have been training other countries now. So they've taught the same trick to Cuba, to Venezuela, and I have a feeling Russia also learnt it from them. So now the Bretton Woods agreement that was dissolved in 1971, at that time President Nixon came and said this was temporary. We are temporarily suspending the Bretton Woods, but we'll go back to it. 50 years have passed. And the temporary period has lasted 50 years. We have not seen an alternative system. And now if you understand this choking system that they have. So Bretton Woods, as much as it looked nice, and all these institutions that were created, 1971 Bretton Woods was taken out, but these institutions remained. IMF remained, World Bank remained, and the World Trade Organization remained. So they've used these tools to strangle countries. Yes. Countries that are going against their principles. And they're weaponizing the US dollar. So you can see Zimbabwe. Zimbabwe was an example in Africa. Their currency was devalued by you know how much percent? 2.2 million %. Until they discarded their own currency. They started dealing in US dollars. Now they've started recovering. And they can do that with any country that they want. They just isolate you, they put sanctions on you. So there was this strangling power that the US had and the global north, exploitative. Now mind you, Russia was a participant in the Bretton Woods conference, but they did not sign it. They did not ratify that agreement. They said, we don't find this right, and we are not in agreement with this system. But anyway, if you've understood this choking system, the weaponization of the US dollar, so now you'll understand Kazan. The Kazan conference that came in, that was held last week, BRICS 2024, Kazan, Russia. In the background, you have the Kul Sherif mosque. So Kazan was very smartly chosen, the destination for this. It has a Muslim identity. There are Christians living there. There are Orthodox Christians living there. you have the local Tartars, and then you have Europeans, and there is coexistence. They are all living together at peace. George Galloway was there, and he mentioned this. When you walk around the streets of Kazan, you see coexistence. Everybody is living together. It's an example that needs to be followed by the rest of the world. And when he went through the supermarkets in Kazan, there was not a single Western product seen. So it looks like Russia has found a way out, and all the supermarkets had only Russian and Eastern goods, no Western goods. So Kazan, culturally rich place, and this mosque that you have, the school Sherif mosque, is a symbol to show the extent of the expansion of the Islamic empire during those times. So there was a message that was being given, and it was to invite or to cater for the Western participants in this seminar. So BRICS was formed in 2009. First it was just BRIC, B-R-I-C, so Brazil, Russia, India and China. And then in 2011, South Africa also joined in, so it became BRICS. But now they have been expanding, and now you have Egypt, Iran, UAE, Ethiopia that have joined in. Saudi Arabia is still on the fence. They have been invited, but they are not committing. So they are not fully fledged members, although the flag is here. But the main people who are controlling BRICS is Russia, India, China, and now Iran. They are called the RICS, R-I-I-C. They are the ones who are running the policy of BRICS. So this is an alternative system now. So Bretton Woods in 1944, and 2024 you have Kazan, which is trying to look for an alternative system. One of their main goals is to have a currency, a common currency. It has not materialized yet. You already have a digital system that they have designed. I think it's called the M-Bridge or something like that. So digitally they're already dealing with each other. They've created a system which is bypassing the SWIFT system. So the Western system, Bretton Woods, and the one that came through that has been totally sidelined, and they're trading with each other in their local currencies. So for example, India bought all the Russian oil in rupees. They're trading with China in yuan. There was a system whereby India was also trading with Tanzania in rupees. So this is a system they're trying to create, but there's a lot to be done. Within themselves, they have a lot of differences, but they're trying to iron it out. Year after year, they're getting stronger and stronger to create an alternative system. So you have the G7, which are the rich countries of the world, and in contrast, you have BRICS now, and you have BRICS Plus. So Kazan was very, very important, as much as Bretton Woods was important in 1944 to create system of the US dollar and to make it a dominant currency. Kazan now has become a symbol for BRICS to create an alternative. It's waited way too long. 1971, they eliminated the Bretton Woods exploitative system, weaponization of the US dollar, choking of US economy, of world economies, and the hegemony. BRICS is trying to eliminate this. This is Mama Samiha in Johannesburg last year when you had the BRICS summit. Tanzania was also invited, and she also had talks. So the big question here is, will Tanzania eventually join BRICS or not? So if there were some economists here from UDSM, it would be nice to have a discussion with them as to what discussion is going on in UDSM. What are they discussing? Are they studying this BRICS model? So BRICS is proposing that this currency that is going to come up is going to be pegged against the gold. So they're trying to bring back the old system, to bring in discipline so that people don't exploit the world economies. There's something about the Kazan Manifesto. They came up with a final message right at the end. So they had the main Kazan seminar, the BRICS seminar, and then you had the outreach. So all the countries that were invited, the Secretary General of United Nations was also invited, the Palestinian Authority were also invited. Almost 33 countries, if I'm not mistaken, were invited. 34? 34. Yeah, 34 countries were invited. So there was an outreach. Everybody was allowed to speak. And the meeting went on for 3 hours plus. People were allowed to speak and air their views about this BRICS system. So they came up with a Kazan Manifesto, and it's very interesting. It says, we condemn the attempts to subject development to discriminatory, politically motivated practices. So you want to bring about development, but you put a lot of conditions. Third world countries, he says, you want to develop, we have political conditions. So this seminar said, we condemn the attempts to subject development to discriminatory, politically motivated practices, including, but not limited to, unilateral coercive measures that are incompatible with the 5 principles of the UN Charter. United Nations had its charter. Every country is equal to bring them together, but they say that the development that is proposed or that is going on just now is against the UN Charter. Explicit or implied political conditionality of development assistance activities aiming at compromising the multiplicity of international development assistance providers. So basically they want to get rid of this hegemony that is there in the world just now. This is the main aim of BRICS. There's some articles that I want you to read. We can't go into detail because of this limited time, but what was the BRICS about? What were the details that were discussed? What went on in the seminar? And what are they aiming for? So Pepe Escobar is one of my favorite analysts. He was there. He is based in Russia. And there's an article in the Cradle. For those of you who follow the Cradle, BRICS post-Kazan, a laboratory of the future. It's a beautiful article. If you want to see the details of this seminar that they had in Kazan, the 3-day seminar, this is a good article to read. So where are we heading? Imam Khomeini, may Allah bless his soul, 1979, after the Iranian Revolution, he came in and he brought about a vision which people did not understand at that time. A vision for a political vision, I would say, that was introduced in 1979. People at that time did not understand, but now it is being followed. The fruits, it's bearing fruits now after 40 years of the Iranian Revolution, as far as politics is concerned. When it comes to world economy, we have a genius in the form of Shahid Muhammad Baqir al-Sadr. He had proposed something during his time which people did not understand. Our economics. Iqtisaduna, there's a book, part 1, part 2. I have not read the book in detail, and I'm not an economist. So I started reading it and I got lost, because there are some terms that can only be understood by an economist. But this is a discussion that we can have. If you can get hold of a few economists who are well versed with the current economy, and they've studied the BRICS system, and because we are going towards the zuhur of the 12th Holy Imam, Ajjalallahu Ta'ala Farajuhu Sherif, Allahumma salli ala Muhammad. We need to work towards a system that is going to be adopted by the 12th Holy Imam. And this is a good guideline. So when it came to politics, Imam Khomeini gave us the guideline, an ideal Islamic government, the system that is there, it is becoming a model. Yes, a lot needs to be done, but it's become a role model which people want to follow now. It's become an ideal. Similarly, this man, Shahid Muhammad Baqir al-Sadr, had proposed something about economics, which was not understood then, but is something that needs to be studied. And now that we're talking about economic systems, the Bretton Woods, and you'll have BRICS, which again will not be very ideal. But then the direction will be given by this book. Just to give you a few glimpses of the problem of BRICS. Within BRICS themselves, you have India, which is playing both sides. This time, one of the invitees, the invited people was Turkey. Turkey came in to Kazan. Turkey is the second largest army. Turkey has the second largest army in NATO. And they're still waiting on the margins of EU. They have not been admitted fully into the EU. They've been waiting all this time. They've been sidelined. They've been given second grade treatment. So the moment they were invited into BRICS, they came in and they're studying BRICS in detail. And it looks like they might join in. Saudi Arabia again on the border. They're committing, they're not committing. Venezuela applied to join BRICS, but it was rejected. You know, it was rejected by who? It was rejected by Brazil. Brazil rejected the candidacy of Venezuela. Why? Because the government, Lula, is pro-BRICS, but the people under them, there's a strong power against the government of Brazil, and they say, we don't want Venezuela. So these are the problems that BRICS is facing. Within BRICS itself, they have their own differences that they need to iron out. So there's a long way to go. But the main concept is de-dollarization. Bretton Woods was dollarization. Kazan, as Pepe Escobar says, it is a train station from where the train is leaving now, a fast moving train which is left from Kazan station. Thank you. And it is going towards de-dollarization. So this is something that we need to keep our eyes open to. This is happening. We can't just ignore it, because eventually it is going to affect all of us here. The questions that we have to ask ourselves: how stable is the US dollar? When de-dollarization comes, which currency should we take? Should Tanzania be joining BRICS or not? All these questions should be coming into our mind, and these should be our discussions. And we start planning from now, that where are we going to stand as and when it happens. It should not take us by surprise. If we ignore it just now, it's very likely to take us by surprise, and it doesn't look like it's going to be very pleasant, because from the way they predict, it's going to be very fast, it's going to be very rapid. So we need to be prepared. So that's why I thought of taking up this topic just as a changamoto, just to plant the seed, so we start doing our own research and we start carrying on from here, especially because of our faith and our beliefs. We're heading towards the government of the 12th Holy Imam. So Bretton Woods, we have Kazan, and where are we heading? Where do we take our economies in preparation for the 12th Holy Imam? Inshallah, may Allah give us the enlightenment to understand what is happening around the world, and may He give us the capacity to practice what we study, inshallah. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.